Do you ever have a problem with laggy video editing and you're wondering where to even start in the troubleshooting process? Recently, I fixed my laggy editing situation. This channel is all about helping you make video, live stream, or do gaming on an ultra small budget, and small budget often means lag problems. Worse, one good way to troubleshoot is to replace parts of your setup until it works properly. But small budget also means buying random hardware just as a random guess is not really a good option. Recently, I fixed my laggy editing problem. Here's the steps that I took to find exactly what was going wrong and how to fix it, in my case, and hopefully some of this process helps in your case as well. So I'm sitting here at my desk and I'm trying to edit a video and I'm thinking, why is it so slow? Like everything I do, I'm using Shotcut to edit, by the way. But everything I do, it's like I hit a button, I click on a clip, I do whatever, I tell it to split. It takes like 10 seconds or 5 seconds. It feels like 10 seconds to actually do the process and what's going on. So I open my activity monitor, or rather the task manager on Windows, and I find this. You can see it finally stopped. It's been going for like 20 minutes or something. You can see basically everything was reasonable in terms of system usage and everything, but Ethernet was off the scale. Now I expect in my case it's going to use a lot of Ethernet, and the reason is simply because I'm actually not editing on the PC. Here's what I mean, here's what the problem is, and then we're going to talk about how to fix it. There's the PC. Those two monitors are both connected to the same PC, and that's where I have Shotcut running. If you guys have a different editing software, it would be a similar idea, but that's just the one I happen to be using. It's free, it's open source software, link in the description if I remember to put it there, and if I don't, let me know. So I'm editing on the PC because it's my gaming PC. It's the most powerful graphics card out of any computer I have, most powerful CPU and everything like that. Even it has more RAM by a little bit than any computer I have. However, its storage, its SSD is extremely small. So I actually have it set up right here. This is a 2008 iMac, and I'm using this one in order to actually store all the files. It has connected to it down here. You can't actually see. I thought it was right here. There it is. Let's try not to unplug that. I think we're good. But it's actually got a 4 terabyte hard drive connected to it, and I'm using this old machine that at the moment is about 14 years old as a network storage because it's slow. It can do very little, but it can store things, which is absolutely brilliant. So, with that being that, and I just realized you can see me in the reflection. Hello! And so I essentially have the video project and video files stored on here for the massive capacity, and I'm editing them on there. And how I have them connected is over my Ethernet network. Now, you may be wondering, what in the world is that? Basically, think of your home Wi-Fi network, and you can connect different computers, different devices and things, and transfer files between them and that kind of thing. It's the same thing as the home Wi-Fi network, except that it is over a wire instead. So why is it so laggy? As you can see here, I'm working with a 2.5 hour footage, and I have proxy turned on. I have preview scaling turned on. If you guys don't know what those features are, that's a topic for another video. Let me know if you want me to explain that. They save a lot of, they make it a whole lot faster, but not faster enough, as you can see. So let's say if I want to go and split this clip, so let's put the thing there and then hit S. And spinning. It took a while for that to even show up. It actually says, and there we go. Now it did it. Now that was actually surprisingly quick. Sometimes it takes twice or 3 times as long as that. Okay, I just hit the undo button and then tried backing the scroll bar up, and the whole thing says Shotcut not responding. Now, why is that? And I can't actually show you it says that because that would give away what the video is, and I don't want to give that away right here. Try it again, hit S. I hit S just slightly after I said it there. Spinning. Finally done. And sometimes it takes 2 or 3 times longer than that. Now, you may be saying, what's the big deal? It's just like 5 seconds. Well, when you have, like I have had in some videos, 200 or 300 cuts like that, that's my guess. I've never actually counted them, but when you take like 3 hours of footage and cut it down to half an hour sometimes, it starts to be a lot of cuts. And when every single cut, you had to do that at the beginning, do that at the end, and then right click to delete it and wait for it to show the menu and then wait for it to delete. It's like something's going on. What's going on? Well, and it takes forever to generate the audio waveforms as well. You can see I advanced it to 51 minutes. It's not there. So here's a pro tip on how to troubleshoot tech stuff and try to identify what's going on, is follow the trail, because there's many places where something can go wrong, so it can be hard to identify. So you want to start, like, for example, this is an old computer. It's 14 years old, and it actually, this hard drive down here is connected by a USB 2 connection, which I was thinking perhaps that being an older connection might be slowing it down too much. But as far as I could tell, being a spinning disk hard drive, it actually wouldn't be that greatly hindered. It might be hindered quite substantially, but not enough to make the level of difference that we're seeing in our issue over here. So what do? Start at the source and follow the trail. So the first place to check is Task Manager if you're on Windows, or Activity Monitor on Mac. And I noticed, now you can't actually see the graphics card here. I have a different program for that, and graphics card was basically not being used. But what is being used is the Ethernet. So you might see CPUs really high, you might see memories really high, that kind of thing. And if you're new to troubleshooting, you start to get a sense after some time of what types of lag would be caused by which types of issues. And I'm quite used to memory being too full, quite used to CPU being too full, not on this PC. Memory is occasionally an issue because I only have 8 gigabytes, but the CPU is never an issue on this PC, so I would be really surprised if that were the issue. But as you can see, 5%. Now, the interesting thing, obviously the Ethernet is where it is bottlenecking, and I was like, why is that? Is it because it's connected to an older computer, or what's going on? And I realized, hang on a second, where is this capping it at? You can see 92, 90, 91, 90, like, if it were the hard drive's USB connection, for those of you guys who don't know about USB 2, now this hard drive actually is 3, but the computer's 2. And that's the other thing, is it's always the weakest link in a chain that's the one that breaks, or in this case, slows down. And one thing about USB 2, the little bit that I've researched it, apparently it can only transfer data in one direction at a time. So if you're trying to send and receive files, basically it essentially means it'll be slower because it has to constantly switch direction, as opposed to USB 3 can do simultaneous transfer, like send and receive, like to the hard drive, from the hard drive, that kind of thing at the same time, versus USB 2 has to be switching, so it essentially gives you half the speed. But there's where, if you know a little bit about hard drives, the spinning disk kind, they spin, obviously. And the outer ring of the hard drive, because it's a spinning platter, right? The outer ring has more bits in it, and so the data comes faster from the outer ring, versus the inner ring, there's less space, so there's fewer bits, so the data comes slower. So you would expect, if it's from the hard drive, that it would be constantly varying speed and that kind of thing. Even like the USB connection, I would expect it to be varying the amount of data that it can get through. Basically, we're trying to identify, why is the Ethernet the bottleneck here? So obviously, it's most likely not on the old Mac's end of things. It appears to be this Ethernet connection, because you look at how stable it is. It's like constantly around 90 megabytes per second. It goes down to 85, it goes up to 95, and it is like just constant, and it's just slightly below 100 megabits per second. What does that 100 megabits per second remind you of? If you've ever worked with Ethernet, if you haven't, it's basically Wi-Fi but through a wire. It actually surprised me that some people didn't even know what it was. But if you've ever worked with it, you may have seen things like terms like Gigabit Ethernet. You may have seen 10/100 or 10/100/1000. And basically what that is how fast data can be transferred through that connection. So in your home network is where you would notice it more, unless you happen to have a really, really good internet connection, because there's two different spheres that you're talking about. You're talking about connecting to the broader internet, and you're talking about just within your home network. And for us, to the broader internet, we have 15 megabits down, 10 up. So 100 megabit switch makes no difference. We don't notice whether it's 100 or 1,000 or whatever. It just, we're nowhere near that anyways to the broader internet. However, things are a little different when you're trying to transfer files or edit or whatever in your home network. Now, how we have our home network set up, at least the parts that are relevant to what we're talking about here. Here is the old Mac that's storing the video and the project and everything. Here is my gaming PC that is using its graphics card and everything, and it's actually editing the project. And how do we transfer between them? Well, over here is our Wi-Fi router. We have the Wi-Fi portion turned off, so it's just the wired connections. So you connect an Ethernet wire between that and the gaming PC, and between that and the old Mac. Now, I keep saying old Mac because that's what I'm using. If you happen to have a NAS, network attached storage, it's basically the same idea. The technical terms, I'm using the SMB file transferring protocol set up in the Mac's sharing preferences, which works functionally very similar to a NAS, so it's practically the same thing. Anyway, that technical stuff aside, whatever you're storing your data on is here. And so what happens anytime you go to edit, you go on the gaming PC, open the project, it sends the request to your home router and then to the storage. Gets the file that it needs, and then it transfers the data to the home router and to my gaming PC using its graphics card and everything, and it's actually editing the project. The router basically acts as a forwarding point that sends it to different devices on your network, whichever one needs it. And so the speed of your router makes a very, very big difference, especially since a 10/100 Ethernet connection, that's 100 megabits. That means it can run at 2 speeds. It can run on older networks that are 10 megabits per second. It can run on newer networks that are 100 megabits per second. Now, that is megabits per second. That's a very different thing than megabytes per second. So, a megabit, so 1 bit, or let's say it this way, 1 byte is 8 bits. So, a megabyte is 8 megabits. So, 100 megabits happens to be 12.5 megabytes per second. And if you know anything about numbers of file transfers and videos and stuff, that is really, really slow. 12.5 megabytes per second. That's enough to watch video, but try to edit over that connection, it's not possible. And that is why it's ridiculously slow. Now, a gigabit is 1000 megabits per second, and that happens to work out to 125 megabytes per second, which then you're getting into the territory of spinning disk hard drive speed. You're finally up into that territory. That's not SSD speed, but in my case, I won't even notice the difference. It'll feel like a normal hard drive. So back to what we were saying about troubleshooting and following the chain, it just so happens that our router is a gigabit router. So why are we seeing the slowdown? That graph in Task Manager that I showed you, it should be a lot closer to 1000, and instead it's capped just below 100. Somehow it took me months before I even thought to check this, but in between, because of the way our house is set up, we have downstairs is where our internet connection comes in. And so that's where our router is. So to run the wires all the way to upstairs, now this is going to sound simple. There's actually something more to it that makes it even more complicated. So where we have our Wi-Fi router downstairs, going across the room, we have one Ethernet cable going to a switch. Now, a switch, like this one, this isn't actually the one. The one that we have downstairs is a gigabit switch. I double-checked that. So that should be fine. Then we have, I can't remember what it was, maybe a 75-foot cable or something, or maybe 50, I can't quite remember, going to upstairs. And rather than running 7 different cables or 5 different cables or whatever, I have a second switch in my room right over there. You can sort of see it buried in the back there. It's hard to get to. I managed to pull it out enough to find out it's actually not gigabit. Now, this isn't actually the box for it. This is a box for a different one, but it's very, very similar. 10100. And I confirmed that, yes, that one is actually 10100 as well. That's an issue. That is where the bottleneck is. If you go back to this diagram, both of these computers are both connected to this slower switch. Now, if you don't know how an Ethernet switch works, I did just some simple, quick research on it. And an unmanaged switch apparently just basically works like a forwarding beacon. I don't know if beacon's the right word, but anyway. Essentially what happens is my gaming PC will send a request. It'll say, hey, I want this video for editing. And it will send the request. It will go to the switch and then to that computer. And then it goes from there, takes the video and transfers the data, and then forwards it back to the gaming PC. I know switches often talk about the data that can be transferred per port instead of just the unit as a whole, which would mean it could do simultaneous in multiple ports. I suppose it could depend on the switch. I'll have to keep an eye out for that in the troubleshooting situation, but the first issue is just to replace the 100 megabit switch with a gigabit switch. And that is where this comes in. We got this a while back. We weren't actually thinking of gigabit. at the time, but I need an extra port in my room, and so it's an 8-port switch. But back to the idea of troubleshooting, we have found the weakest link in the chain. So if you imagine it like a chain, we have found the weakest link in the chain, and we have found the potential second weakest link in the chain if it turns out to actually be a weak link, if it works the way that I'm fearing it might. But the good news is this switch here, you can see it's gigabit. It says here up to you can't read that. It's fuzzy. Up to 1 gigabit per second dedicated bandwidth per port. So they keep dropping the phone. So this should solve the first and potential second weakest links in the chain in one go. At least, back to the diagram, at least for this part of the setup. And the good news, all the other pieces of the network are all gigabit as well, including, and I was surprised by this, the old 2008 iMac. I couldn't remember when Gigabit Ethernet became a thing, but according to everymac.com, this particular model of Mac has 10/100/1000 base-T Ethernet connection, which basically means it has gigabit. So after setting this up, there will no longer be that bottleneck. Now, you can see immediately after installing a gigabit switch, so the whole network's gigabit, it made a huge difference. So where it was capped before was around 100, which would have been around here, and you can see this graph scales. So it says 500 megabits because it doesn't need more than that right now. But as you can see, it scales, so it's using well over double. Here would be double. Here would be like maybe triple or so, a little bit more than triple what it was using before. So that makes a huge, huge difference, and that's gonna really unbottleneck the system, and the editing software is gonna do so much better. And as you can see, it is now incredibly responsive. I can right click, immediately get the thing, split, it's immediately split. Very, very responsive. Since it's not constantly waiting for like a million years for the data to transfer between one computer and the other. Excellent. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Hopefully this little tutorial on how to troubleshoot tech was helpful to some of you guys, and see you in the next video.